We would like to welcome you to another presentation on our Revelation series. This is part 4 of volume 3, the critique of the things that Stephen Hargrave is claiming.
And we got a couple of points regarding exegesis, and I just think that they're worth looking at because Steve is one of the three, and we know the three are very important. And if I went to I'm just going to pick a denomination. If I went to a Baptist church and I sat down and I listened to a sermon, and I've done that before, I have never listened to sermons outside of hearing this particular group that have been so exegetically wrong. And yet, as you listen to each one of these lectures, there are multiple mistakes made in regard to the scripture and the interpretation of the scripture. And if these people are indeed apostles, how can that logically be true? It just can't be. You get better preaching, sorry, Steve, you get better preaching from a first-year grad out of seminary than you do from Steve. So
what he's saying is, I'm supposed to make all men see how this mystery relates to God gathering together all things in Jesus Christ. And the intention is that to the principalities and powers in heavenly places, they would know. It's not just talking about spirits. It's talking about the princes of this world. That the princes or principalities and powers in heavenly places, those kings of the earth in high places, would look at the manifold wisdom of God in this plan, and they would say, God is wiser than we. The kings of the earth would look on the church and look at the plan of God and how he reconciles all things in the world, and they would say, that's exactly what I was trying to do, but I couldn't.
The church isn't run that well. Just as an organization. I don't think their investments or their bookkeeping or their, the order that they're so proud of and stuff, it's not something that leaders of business and rulers of nations are looking to get their consultation on leadership by any means. I don't know what he's referring to. It's a fantasy.
Yeah, I found it interesting that he was kind of going along, and then he said, "Well, it's not just the heavenly powers," and then he switches the entire scenario. It's like a sleight of hand, and all of a sudden, in a passage that refers quite specifically to principalities and powers as being in heavenly places, we wind up with kings and earthly rulers. It's almost as if they want to take everything in Scripture, whether they be angels or whether they be whatever, and bring it into this realm as like a placeholder. An angel is a placeholder for a person. Well, most commentators don't see it that way. Scripture doesn't see it that way. But suddenly angels become Ray, or they become Dan, or they become the four that are holding back the winds. Yeah. All these people are made to be something that is represented in the book of Revelation as a heavenly being. So here he's gone into Ephesians, talked about principalities and powers, and converted it into the kings of the earth. I think it's an illegitimate use of the scripture. And I just there are several other places in scripture, because I took a moment to look, where we see those similar terms to principalities and powers being used in a spiritual sense. Colossians 1:6, Colossians 2:15, Romans 8:38, and 1 Corinthians 15:24 all have references to principalities and powers that are obviously spiritual powers. So I just see that as a misuse of scripture. And I don't even know why he would do that. Well, I do know why, because it makes his point that they're so special that what they're doing is going to take Bill Gates and knock him on his heels.
Right. They're just wanted to be the name above most names. Name of all names but one.
Yeah, and Bill Gates is gonna, what did he say, bow down at Ray Tinsman's feet? they made that claim.
Yeah, sure they did. That sounds on brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably so. Evidence that they sit on thrones.
Say before I continue with the next verse that the verses that we so labored to go through that were explaining the mystery are in fact proof that the apostles sat on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel, because those letters were written from the very thrones that they sat on. Those letters were written with the authority and on the seats that Jesus Christ said that they would be on. And it did judge the 12 tribes of Israel, and not just talking about the church. Yes, they were establishing the church, but they literally judged Israel through the ministration of what God intended to do in the entire world, and that is gather together all of Adam's fallen race.
Now, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. In the context of the Bible, I probably agree with that interpretation. So I'm curious where you go.
Okay, well, let's look at it. So we're going to say immediately that the apostles sat on thrones. That means now we're looking for proof, by the way. So the apostles sat on thrones, and what they're trying to say there is that the apostles had authority. Okay, we can agree with that without a whole lot of difficulty. I'm having a bit of difficulty with the fact that they are actively judging the 12 tribes of Israel in any other the most tangential sense, because we know that they haven't been put on those thrones to judge Israel yet, I don't think, because Jesus has not yet returned. We know that the apostles went out and spread the gospel wherever they went. So I'm not sure that those letters that they that were written, and what letters we might add, confirm the message. The whole thing was, to me, it was just kind of, what would the word be? It was a mishmash of words that didn't make a lot of sense.
Okay. What I understand, they're replacement theologians, right? They believe that Zion is now the Christian church, and that the children of God are defined as Christians, and that has replaced Israel. And so in this sense, what I understand him to be saying, which I don't take too much umbrage with, is that in the epistles and things, you think of Hebrews, you think of Ephesians, you think of Galatians. In fact, frankly, most of the New Testament, the thesis of it is we're democratizing spirituality now. And Israel has these problems, or she's in bondage with her children, right? And all of these metaphors that are used as judgment against Israel. You see Jesus in his ministry saying, not a stone here is going to be left. I'm giving you back your house desolate. I'm cursing the fig tree. Myriad metaphors for New Testament people judging the old quote unquote dispensation, the Jewish religion. So that's why it seems to hold water for me as a metaphor.
Okay. I'm not as persuaded, because Paul wrote most of the New Testament, and a small handful of the other apostles wrote the rest of the New Testament, not that many. And then we don't hear from a great number of them. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't do much for me.
Oh, because you're not sure that was the message of the 12?
I'm not sure. Steve tells us that he is providing proof that the apostles sat on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel, because those letters were written from the very thrones that they sat on.
Okay, yeah.
So we don't have, letters from all the apostles. We don't have much of a record of some of their lives at all. And it's just, for me, that is not a proof.
Sure, proof is probably too strong a word.
Yeah. So
it's potentially a fair interpretation, but it's not proof.
That's yes, okay. That would be my problem, because I just don't see it as a proof.
Yeah.
And what will happen is that he will build on their apostleship, because he ties this bookend thing into a number of different things. So, well, if they said on one hand, then on the other hand, we must also have that authority. So I was unpersuaded by it.
Yeah, which is an important point, because like you said, this first premise leads to the next more dangerous premise.
And
that's what I see them doing with scripture. So I'm not finding proof in there either in what he's claiming, but I do see them over and over again taking a few scriptures and twisting those and using those to elevate themselves into an apostleship position right now, which they claim they're sitting on messianic seats here as judges. Any opportunity they can take to find a scripture that they can add meaning to and say, this is what it means, therefore, this is where we are right now. They take every opportunity to do that.
It's always self-aggrandizing, which should be a red flag.
yeah.
I want to tell you something. I wouldn't care if Jesus came back and Tamika and all them had their earrings in their ear when he came. I'm not suggesting that we're changing anything. I am saying there's a big world and there's a big God, and the gospel has been cast into the sea and has gathered together of every. And if it's gathered together of every kind, don't you be the kind that look at the kind and say that is not the kind. Fullness of the Gentiles. The Gentile truth has been dispersed throughout the Gentile world. I'm trying to close. It's not working. I like you, Brother Bovers. It's for the apostles to say what's good and bad. There y'all go. Y'all just trying to get the apostles to rule. No, we are not.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. That's pretty transparent.
What I thought was
get to say what's good and bad. Again, it's putting the control and the power into them, and you as a congregant, you have no say. You're really just invalidated as a congregant.
Absolutely.
what caught my attention as I was thinking about this is that Scripture tells us in a number of places that the mark of maturity in a Christian is being able to discern good from bad. It's something that we are taught to do in our Christian walk, and then we live it out in our lives. So if we're going to cede the ability to determine what's good or bad to the apostles, we are going to stunt our own personal growth so that we will never mature. It's the opposite of what is supposed to be happening in real life.
Super important point.
It is the opposite, but it's fitting for them again when they say you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. Therefore, they don't encourage you to read through Scripture and grow as an individual. That's highly discouraged, and they don't want that, because the moment that starts happening, you're going to start questioning, and then, well, Ben, you know where that leads.
Right.
And only one person, only one being declares what is good or bad, and that is God himself. So the apostles certainly are able to look at Scripture and discern what God believes good and bad is, but so isn't every person that functions within the congregation. That's not exclusive to the apostles. You don't need to be an apostle to be able to determine what is good or bad. And you made reference to this earlier in our discussion that talk about sandals. And that if they said sandals were sinful, then sandals were sinful. I mean, seriously. In what world?
Yeah. So they referring to a scripture where they cast out the net, they gather in of every kind, and then the fishermen sort it out, and they see the apostles as those fishermen in that parable. It's interesting to hear him say something like, don't say of all those kinds, well, you're a different kind than me, and therefore you're not acceptable, which is excellent advice that he doesn't take himself. He says, you're not allowed to say what's good and what's bad, but I am. instead of realizing that he's on the cusp of a breakthrough of liberal thought, liberal in the Renaissance sense, that as we said before, other people are having spiritual experiences. Other people do have valid existences and connections to divinity and things like that. And that it is bigoted of you to claim that they don't. That's a mistake that he should stop making, as well as the congregation.
Any thoughts on that, Kelly?
Well, I agree with you, but they're not going to, I don't see them changing, because they'd have to step down off their thrones.
Right.
And as we spoke about before, whatever their hunger is, or their thirst to be in this position of power and to be sitting on messianic thrones ruling, that's what they're after. And to make any other changes, they would have to step down, and they're not going to do that. I don't see that happening anyway.
No, that's the main thing. That's the first doctrine of their constitution, is that apostles are the best.
Yeah. And when you mention that scripture about sorting, they say that they're casting out the net right now. And that's what the apostles are doing, is they're sorting and deciding who is worthy and who isn't. They claim they're actually doing that right now.
Absolutely. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
And it would be frustrating to me as a congregant. Let's take me personally, if I was still there, because this isn't my culture. Steve wants to be able to have Black culture and listen to hip hop music, and Ray listens to country music, and people that come in, the multitudes are coming, they're going to have tattoos, they're going to dress, they're going to wear shorts, they're going to, we're going to lower the standard for all of them. But don't you do that. However,
yeah, exactly.
why am I grandfathered into these draconian rules when actually it's okay for everyone to express themselves? Shifts are happening. I do expect the clothes to change eventually, just the same way the music has changed. I do expect them to continue to think that we're all going to believe there's a continuity to that it's not a hypocrisy, which it absolutely is. I'm glad they're evolving, but I wish they would be transparent about it, or at least, introspective enough, self-aware enough to realize that transformation is happening, and why it's happening, because they were wrong about spirituality for the last 40 years. And they're evolving. It's quite frustrating.
I'm not so sure. In one regard, I know Lee and I spoke about the fact that maybe they're changing their position on medical care, and that, of course, would be a positive change.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of music and other things that they're now allowing in, I'm not so sure I would see that as it's evolving, but to whose benefit? For instance, are you familiar with the Gospel Trumpet app? Did you ever have that app when you were
Well, I have
a member?
I have the app now.
You have the app now.
Yeah.
Have you tried to go on to, I think there's a section for videos, and you now have to pay for a premium app to access that.
Yeah, they talked about that. I think at camp meeting, they did a whole day picking this app. Yeah, no, I've never seen
So
that.
we're now evolving in the sense that we're going to open things up to you that we couldn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for you to get that, you have to pay us money.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll decide which things.
It would be my opinion that, evolving or not, until they become more like Jesus, until they stop abusing people, until they love people and care for people and do what's best for people, they really haven't gone anywhere. And it makes no difference how they evolve if they continue to treat people in the manner in which they treat them now.
Yeah. It's akin to governments when they are taking more power to themselves, but they're doling out treats to the populace. We'll give you the games, but we're an empire now,
Yeah.
And the people are getting some things loosened up on and other things tightened down on. The things that are, and that betrays what's important to the leadership. What's important to them is authority, not holiness.
And that's what scares me the most. And when you're talking about them again evolving, when I look at what they're preaching behind the pulpit with Revelation, that to me is scary. And I know in Elmer, they said that the preaching has really changed since Daniel Lane was there.
No doubt.
It's really gone in a whole other direction.
Absolutely.
And I don't see that changing. It's getting worse as far as I can see.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our material. Ben, would you like to take just a couple of minutes and summarize things, and then maybe Kelly, you can close us, and we'll perhaps do this some other time. So
Sure. So today's sermon ostensibly was about the salvation of the Jews, but we heard mostly about apostleship and justifying apostleship, which that's what's expected no matter what the topic is.
That's true. And that is the topic that they mostly talk about, is their apostleship right now, which is what I said when I find with Revelation, that's all they focus on is Revelation and their apostleship and them sitting on thrones. So I'll bring this to a close. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact either Lee or myself. Our contact information will be at an end slide at the end of the video.
Disappointment is a bitter pill to swallow, paying back the hope I borrowed from someone I never knew. And it's a forfeit, humans in the suits of heroes, undressed by whispered conspiracies, in quest for truth. But if the truth is what you're looking for, you don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do you really still believe that the truth will set you free? I do. Someday, well, if the truth